Welcome back to our continued coverage of the federal trial of the Alexander brothers. For weeks, we've been in the New York courtroom and reviewing transcripts, listening to testimony and seeing evidence in the sex trafficking case against Oren, Tal, and Alon Alexander. Oren and Tal built a real estate brokerage empire on a brand of ultra luxury and celebrity. Their brother Alon was not in the business, but was, according to prosecutors, a key part of their social world. Oren and Tal were at Douglas Elliman for years and then opened up Official in 2022. This week, the trial took a sharp turn in the scandals of the last decade, a name that has become a punchline for fraud, failure, and the dark side of influencer culture, Fyre Festival. New evidence, including text messages and internal documents, has been introduced by the prosecution, and it paints a disturbing picture. The government argues that for the Alexander brothers and their friends, Fyre Festival wasn't just a party. It was the perfect cover for a sex trafficking operation. Today, we're breaking down the 7 most explosive issues that connect the Alexander brothers to the Fyre Festival, and you can be the judge as to whether or not you find this compelling. First, a quick refresher. Fyre Festival was supposed to be a once-in-a-lifetime luxury music festival in the Bahamas in April of 2017. It was founded by a con man named Billy McFarland and the rapper Ja Rule. To promote it, they launched one of the most successful influencer marketing campaigns in history. Important to note that Oren and Tal also mastered Instagram and influencer marketing. They became influencers themselves, and that's a very interesting dynamic between the Fyre Festival and the Alexanders. On December 12, 2016, around 400 influencers, models, and celebrities, including Kendall Jenner, Bella Hadid, Hailey Bieber, Baldwin at the time, and Emily Ratajkowski all posted the same cryptic burnt orange square to their Instagram feeds at the exact same time. It generated 300 million impressions in 48 hours. Tickets sold out instantly with prices ranging from $1,000 to tens of thousands for VIP packages. But the reality was a catastrophe. Instead of luxury villas, guests arrived to find disaster relief tents. Instead of gourmet meals, they got cheese sandwiches. The bands never showed up. People were stranded. It was a total fraud. Billy McFarland went to federal prison for it, prosecuted by the very same U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York that is now prosecuting the Alexander brothers. And that brings us to the evidence in this trial. The prosecution is arguing that while the festival was collapsing into chaos, and the weeks before, the Alexander brothers and their friends were on a yacht just offshore running a very different kind of operation. The first issue is what's known as the Fyre Puss group chat. I'll mispronounce that for YouTube to not get in trouble here, but this is the name of the WhatsApp group the brothers and their friends used to plan their trip. The name itself is the prosecution's entire argument in a nutshell. Created on March 30th, 2017, the group included Tal Oren, Alon Alexander, along with 2 associates, Eric Dolly and a man named Patrick. The government contends the name proves that from the very beginning, the festival was just a backdrop for what they call a sex conspiracy. The chat is filled with logistics, not about music, but about women, about securing drugs and yachts. Important to note that when it talks about drugs, it appears to be in a social use. It does not appear to be drugs that are going to incapacitate people without their knowledge. It's talking about chocolate mushrooms, some sort of psychedelic that people take to get extremely high, but that is not the same as looking or implicating someone in trying to illicitly drug someone. Issue number 2, the socialite connection, Alex von Furstenberg's overflow. The circle of men involved extended beyond the main group chat. Evidence shows Oren Alexander texting with socialite and investor Alex von Furstenberg, son of the famed designer Diane von Furstenberg. On April 4th, 2017, Oren tells him he's sitting with the Fyre Festival guys. Von Furstenberg replies, "I have too many chicks, want some overflow." Oren then asks him, "Do you have any seats for chicks?" and specifically names Amber Davis, a model, at the center of the most damning allegations. Von Furstenberg agrees to fly her to the festival. The exchange is a stark illustration of how women were discussed as commodities, according to the government. So they're saying that because there's so many people and he's saying there's an overflow, this is trafficking women. Again, they might be crude, but it's up to you to decide if you think that constitutes trafficking as is understood by the statute. Issue number 3, women had to, quote unquote, pass the test. In this same group chat, the government calls a selection process for the women being brought to this festival. On April 21st, 2017, just days before the event, the group was discussing who would get a seat on their private plane. Patrick writes, quote, unquote, depends on Wednesday evening services. Eric Dolly replies, unless you deep throat, they better. Orrin Alexander then chimes in, they got to pass the test. The defense claims these are just jokes. The prosecution argues this is direct evidence that access to the luxury trip was explicitly conditioned on sexual acts. Read whatever you may into that if you think that's compelling, that they're forcing people to perform acts to get on a plane or to sleep on a yacht. Issue 4, girls that do not conform get the tents. On the same day that this Fyre chat was created, Patrick wrote, yeah, we need a couple tents for the girls that do not conform. Orrin Alexander replies with 2 words, or 3 words, walk the plank. This is a central pillar of the government's case. They argue it was a clear threat. Women who refused sexual demands would be kicked off the yacht and thrown into the chaos of the festival grounds, where people were fighting over FEMA tents and scraps of food. The defense calls it a harmless pirate joke, like Pirates of the Caribbean. The prosecution calls it coercion. Throughout this text message chain, you can see that there isn't really that much space on this yacht. They were concerned about where people would sleep or where they would have sexual encounters. But that's very different than saying if someone doesn't participate in something, they're going to be thrown off, walking a literal plank, and forced to fend for themselves for shelter. There's no indication that that's there. But again, that's my opinion on it. You can read that however you might like. Issue number 5, the friends in the chat. This is one of the most critical aspects of the Fyre Festival evidence. Some of the most disturbing and graphic messages in that chat didn't come from the Alexander brothers themselves. It was their friend Eric Dolly who wrote, quote, tell these whores not to bring more than one carry-on bag. It was Dolly who wrote, I may have a new girl that we kick one off for, as if he were swapping out luggage. And it was Dolly who, in discussing the boat's sleeping arrangements, wrote that fitting more than 2 people in a bed for anything more than a quote-unquote F-sesh isn't any good. This is a key point for the defense, who will argue that the Alexanders aren't responsible for the words of their friends. But the prosecution will argue it shows a coordinated conspiracy, a group of men all operating with the same criminal mindset. Again, you can make your own decision as to whether or not you think that is a off-putting and gross way of speaking about people, that is a joke, or if it's an actual criminal conspiracy and you're reading these words to be extremely serious and straightforward and indicative of behavior. Issue number 6, Amber Davis, quote unquote, I woke up to a male genitalia inside me. This is the most explosive piece of evidence to emerge from the Fyre Festival connection. On the morning of May 1st, 2017, as the festival was over, a model named Amber Davis sent a series of text messages to Orrin Alexander. They're now a government exhibit. She wrote, quote, I'm seriously not cool with what happened this morning. I lost all respect for you and Jen. You both know I didn't want it, and I hope that you know how wrong that it was that it is obviously I was not comfortable. She continued, you have to ask someone before you have sex with them. And then the line that is particularly troubling, I woke up to a male genitalia inside me. Orrin's reply, really didn't seem like that, but I'm sorry. A moment later, he added, it was my fingers first. Defense argues that this was actually part of a consensual encounter that happened that night, and that the prosecution now has Orrin, in his own words, admitting to a sexual act that a woman says was non-consensual, right in the middle of that Fyre Festival disaster. Issue number 7, the corporate paper trail and the ghost of Fyre past. Finally, 2 issues that show how organized this was and how surreal the trial has become. First, the paper trail. The prosecution has receipts. Text messages show the group coordinating payment for tickets in a boat, with the total coming to $8,800. The transaction calculated by Patrick was $29.33 per guy. It was run through Tall Alexander's company, Tall Alexander Inc. This, the prosecution argues, is the proof that this wasn't just a vacation, it was a financed operation. And the final detail, the defense lawyers for the Alexander brothers actually pointed out in a court filing that the very same U.S. Attorney's Office prosecuting this case is the one that put Fyre Festival's founder, Billy McFarland, in prison. The defense argued that just mentioning Fyre Festival is unfairly prejudicial because the name is synonymous with fraud. But the prosecution has turned that argument on its head. They are arguing that the chaos, the desperation, and the complete collapse of civilization at Fyre Festival was the entire point and is indicative of what the Alexander brothers did. And it was a perfect storm, the perfect cover for what they say was happening on those yachts, just out of sight. Now, again, this is the arguments on both sides. I'll let you be the judge as to whether or not you think this is proof or evidence that there's some sort of trafficking conspiracy. One might understand that people are inviting attractive people to come to their yacht to hang out at a music festival in the Bahamas, and they're participating in all sorts of activities, but that's not a trafficking conspiracy. They're doing something that they're trying to offer an experience to other people. They're inviting them. They're not expecting them to pay. They're hosting the party, but they're not out there looking to traffic people under the pretense of force, fraud, or coercion. I think it's worth pointing out as well that there's a lot of people shaking in their boots if this is what's considered trafficking under federal statute. A lot of people invite people, don't expect money in return. That's commercial value. And then if, God forbid, something goes sideways, is that then trafficking or under force, fraud, or coercion? Or is that an isolated case and you're dealing with a state court appropriately and vehemently going after someone who's accused of SA or raping someone? Also important to note that these two women are not testifying themselves. These were recovered from the hard drives and from documents that were found in the Alexander brothers' phones. So these women did not come forward. This is the government then taking this and saying this is indicative of some sort of mindset. Again, I'll say I personally don't find this evidence particularly compelling for some sort of wild, far-run conspiracy, but everyone can make their own decision. Like, subscribe, please comment, send any feedback you want. That's where I fall on this one. I don't think that this Fyre Festival stuff indicates that they're drugging people against their will. Again, there's also a follow-up message in which Oren is talking to Jen, Amber's friend, and wanted to make sure the air was cleared. And Jen said that she spoke to her and all is good, something along those lines. Again, these women aren't coming forward. Again, the question is, what's the story? Is this actually part of a larger grand conspiracy in which people are being trafficked against their will and forced to commit a commercial sex act? Remember, in this federal trial, it is not a grape trial for the Alexander brothers. It is a trial about sex trafficking, forcing people to commit commercial sex acts. So even if you were to say that everything is true as described in the worst way you could read those messages, is that trafficking? That's the fundamental question of this case.